statement out of Turkish leaders, just the ones we ask you about. But
Which are the ones I'm not going to respond to.
On Iran, one assumes that you're familiar with the latest Wall Street Journal report concerning the payment of the $400 million to Iran. Is there anything in the Wall Street Journal story that you dispute on factual grounds?
Well, look, rather than getting up here, as much as I'm sure you'd love for me to pick apart
It's a very
every
simple
media
question.
story.
Is there anything you say is untrue in that story?
What I would like to do is respond to it this way, okay? Because I've seen the article. So let me just let me address this whole issue of timing this way. We were able to conclude multiple strands of diplomacy within a 24-hour period. And oh, by the way, you can go back and look at your own work that was done back then. And you'll see that we were completely above board about this. Even the president himself talked about the timing. We were able to conclude multiple strands of diplomacy within a 24-hour period, including implementation of the nuclear deal, the prisoner talks, and the settlement of an outstanding Hague Tribunal claim, which saved American taxpayers potentially billions of dollars. As we said at the time, we deliberately leveraged that moment to finalize these outstanding issues nearly simultaneously. It's already publicly known that we returned to Iran its $400 million in that same time period as part of the Hague Settlement Agreement. With concerns that Iran may renege on the prisoner release, given unnecessary delays regarding persons in Iran who could not be located, as well as, to be quite honest, mutual mistrust between Iran and the United States, we of course sought to retain maximum leverage until after American citizens were released. That was our top priority.
Just to return to my question, is there anything in the Wall Street Journal story that you dispute on factual grounds?
You'd have to, look, I don't have the article in front of me, so I'm not going to go through line by line.
I'm not asking you to do that. I'm just saying you read the thing. If there's something left out at you that you said, well, that's untrue, you'd be in a position to tell us, wouldn't you?
James, I think I've characterized the central finding of the story, which was that the payment of the $400 million was not done until after the prisoners were released. I'm not disputing that.
Why weren't you able to tell us that 10 days ago when I myself asked the question, can you at least assure us that those prisoners were in the process of being released before that money
As I said
touched
at
down?
the time, we weren't in a position then and had no intention of getting into a tick-tock for every movement that happened in that 24-hour period. That's what I answered your question as at the time. I think it was me. We answered your question at the time. That was never our intention to have to do that. But you're asking me about a press story that's already been written about it that has more detail about it. So I'm providing some context with respect to that.
But you're changing a little bit, because first you said that this was two separate diplomatic tracks. That's what the White House said. That's what the State Department said. Now you're saying that it was used as leverage, which would
Connect the two.
Connect the two. Thank you, Jake. Connect them.
They were independent efforts.
But you were using one
They
for
came
leverage
together.
as a part of the other.
No, they came together near simultaneously, and I think it would make sense, perfect sense, that when we're in this moment,
It would. It does make sense.
if your top priority is to get your Americans out, and you're already having some issues about locating some of them, that you want to make sure that that release gets done before you complete that transaction. No, they're connected in the sense that they came together at the same time, and we obviously were making our priority getting the Americans out. And frankly, I think if we had done it any differently, then I think you and I and James and I would be having a much different conversation up here, wouldn't we?
The payment was contingent on their release.
What I'm saying is,
Right?
what I'm saying is that because we had concerns that Iran may renege on the prisoner release, given unnecessary delays that we were already regarding some persons in Iran, as well as some mutual mistrust, we, of course, naturally, and should be held at task if we didn't, sought to retain maximum leverage until after the Americans were released. That was our top priority.
Can you connect the dots for me? How does the withholding of the cash give you the kind of leverage you were seeking?
We felt that it would be imprudent not to consider that some leverage in trying to make sure that our Americans got out.
So if it has leverage on the release of the Americans, then there's a direct connection between these two events you're now telling us, right?
I'm saying the events came together simultaneously. But obviously when you're inside that 24-hour period and you already now have concerns about the end game in terms of getting your Americans out, it would have been foolish, imprudent, irresponsible for us not to try to maintain maximum leverage. If you're asking me, was there a connection in that regard at the end game, I'm not going to deny that.
So wait, okay, hold on. Getting away from the word leverage, which in basic English, you're saying that you wouldn't give them the $400 million in cash until the prisoners were released, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Is it because the U.S. knew that the Iranians wanted that money at any cost?
I can't get inside the Iranian brain here. First of all, remember, it was their $400 million
Right.
that had been awarded to them by the Hague Tribunal.
Right.
So let's make that clear.
Right.
And because we already had concerns about the end game in terms of getting our people out, we didn't want to take any chances. And so we believed that as much leverage as could be had, we wanted to have. We wanted to keep as much leverage as possible. We believed that holding up that delivery was prudent, and we have released Americans now. I think we'll never know for sure, but at least we got those people home, and there's no apologies for that whatsoever.
Yeah. And wouldn't it be more accurate to say that a ransom is paid and then you get the people back, and not the reverse, which is what happened in this case?
Again, we don't pay ransom, Roz.
Right.
This wasn't a case of ransom. And again, I need to remind you all, while maybe the little bit of the TikTok here that's driven out, you might find new and salacious, there's really nothing new here in the story about how we got those Americans out and how we leveraged opportunities here that were coming together at the same time. You can go back and look at the President's comments and the Secretary's comments when all of this happened. There were opportunities here that we took advantage of, and as a result, we were able to get American citizens back home.
Right, but I'm not disputing that, your characterization that this wasn't ransom. It's just that my traditional understanding of ransom was someone is holding someone hostage, says, give me money, I'll give you the person. The money is handed over, the person is then returned. The opposite happened in this case,
This was,
which is the U.S. citizens were allowed to leave Iran, and then the money from this separate settlement was then transferred. Right.
was provided to them.
So
Yeah, I don't know how.
Sound like a quid pro quo at all,
Yeah,
John.
that was my point. Beyond saying there's no ransom, you've said several times, a lot of people from different podiums in this government have said there was no quid pro quo. What you just described is by definition a quid pro quo, is it not?
No.
How is it not? You said they would not get the money until they were released. Quid quo.
Thank you for the Latin expert.
I mean, what is that? What am I
lesson.
missing in
The
a quid
Latin
pro
lesson.
quo that you have just outlined?
Brad, they were going to get this money anyway because the Hague Tribunal decided that they were going to get their money back. And
No, they hadn't decided.
there was a negotiation inside the Hague Tribunal that that they were going to recover the $400 million principal and then some interest that we negotiated, which saved the taxpayers a lot of money. That process was moving forward, and it was moving forward on an independent track. Separately and distinctly, we were also in talks with them about getting our Americans back. That was also done by a different team and moving forward. These two tracks came together in a very finite period of time. And it would have been, given the fact that Iran hadn't proved completely trustworthy in the past, it would have been imprudent and irresponsible for us to not, since we knew this payment was coming and coming soon, to not hold it up until we made sure we had our Americans out.
Which is why everyone called it a quid pro quo at the beginning, and you disputed that. So I don't quite understand how that changes anything. You're saying it would have been imprudent not to link the payment, the delivery of the money, to the release of the prisoners, but you're saying the delivery of the money wasn't a quid pro quo related to the release of the prisoners? Because
the
there's a
Hague Tribunal had
backstory.
decided, the negotiation had been settled, that process was moving forward and would have moved forward regardless. But because it all happened in a short period of time, yes, we took advantage of that to make sure we had the maximum leverage possible to get our people out and to get them out safely.
So it was a quid pro quo?
No.
You took advantage of it and you made it a quid
We
pro
took
quo?
advantage of leverage that we thought we could have to make sure that they got out safely and efficiently.
So you were holding the Iranians' money hostage?
No, James.
They paid the
No,
ransom.
James. It's their money. It's their money.
'Cause they
were
released
going
the
to get it
prisoners.
anyway.
Would you at least
look,
agree, John?
Guys, we had to, if we hadn't done that, and if for some reason the Iranians did play games and we didn't get the Americans out, and we hadn't tried to use that leverage, then I can understand the disdain and the criticism here. But this was a sound decision made in the end game of two separate negotiation tracks.
I'm making no value judgment on the decision. I'm just trying to get you to say what it is, which is very simple.
I have described what it is for the last 15 minutes.
But
I
we don't-
haven't used
You haven't for
Latin
the last.
phrase
You
that
haven't.
like,
You have not.
But it doesn't mean that I haven't described what happened.
Listen, this happened in January, and this is the first time you've ever said flat out that they wouldn't get the money until the prisoners were released. That took, let's count it, 7 months? Why all the beating around the bush
The
if
only
it was
reason
such a
that we're
great
having this
and
discussion
noble
is because of
decision?
press coverage. Bradley,
So
we
evil
said all along-
reporters have made you
We-
dredge this up?
No, I've never called you guys evil. I've called you
I
other
mean, you
things,
can't
but
blame
never
press
evil.
coverage because you didn't say what this was 7 months ago.
We did describe it 7 months ago.
You did not
Brad.
say
Did
it
we
was
go through
contingent,
the-
this
did
was
we-
contingent on that. And now you're
We
saying
said-
flatly out that this
I
payment
said-
was contingent on the release of the prisoners.
I said
You did
it
not say
was-
that in January.
I said this was, as I said before, we of course wanted to seek maximum leverage in this case as these two things came together at the same time.
John, you said that everyone all along at all points has been completely above board about this, but you would agree that what you're telling us today represents a new factual disclosure from the administration, does it not?
I certainly would agree that this particular fact is not something that we've talked about in the past,
Okay.
but if you go back and look at the press coverage, your own coverage of this when it happened, nobody made any bones about the fact that these two processes were coming together at the same time, and we took advantage of the opportunity we had with the closure of the nuke deal, with the Hague Tribunal, and with talks to get our Americans back. We took full advantage of that, and I don't think anybody in the administration is going to make any apology for having taken advantage of those opportunities to get these Americans home.
And would you agree that a reasonable observer could look upon a situation in which cash is withheld until prisoners are released as something akin to ransom?
Well, an observer, whoever he or she may be, can look at this however they want. I've described now over the last 10 or 15 minutes what happened and what our thought process was going through that, and I'll let others decide for themselves. I got to get going.
Okay,
here, guys.
so we need to, sorry, just before we go then.
With that, Matt.
Okay. I don't have a lot today, but let's start with seeing if get an answer to a question that I asked twice, that was asked twice last week, having to do with the Iran and the $400 million shipment. And that question is, are you now able to say whether or not the plane with the money landed before the plane with the prisoners took off from Tehran? Because as you may know, since the question was last asked on Thursday, one of the former prisoners said that they had to wait for this other plane, or at least an other plane to arrive. Are you able to shed any more light on that?
So I'm not going to get into the TikTok of specifics, but claims that our freed Americans were not allowed to depart Iran until a plane full of cash landed anywhere are false. As U.S. officials have previously publicly discussed, there was a delay in our citizens being released that day that had nothing to do with the Hague settlement and was related to resolving some last-minute issues solely related to the prisoners. Most importantly, locating and ensuring all of the individuals who were involved with the prisoner swap were on the plane and ready to depart with Mr. Razayan, Mr. Abedini, and Mr. Hekmati. Suffice it to say, getting all the pieces put into place, making sure our citizens were released, and with our reciprocal goodwill gesture of providing relief to certain Iranian citizens here in the United States, require delicate diplomacy up to the end. So I think that answers your question.
So, okay, I missed the part where you said that when
We
the
said-
plane
yeah.
arrived.
It was the question if there was a delay before the plane taking off until a plane coming down. It was false.
There was not. So, in
There
other
was
words.
not a delay.
in
There was
other-
no timing that was associated between the two.
Okay, well, whether or not you intended for there to be timing or not, is it correct that the plane with the money landed before the plane with the prisoners took off?
No, claims that the freed Americans were not allowed to depart until a plane full of cash, and I'm doing that in air quotes, are just false.
Yeah, but still, in terms of the timing of it, did one arrive before the other left?
There was no delay in allowing the Americans to leave.
Well, you just said there was a delay and it was related to
Well, there was no delay waiting for a second plane full of cash.
Okay,
Yeah.
I understand that you don't want to draw any connection between the two things. I just want to know whether or not the plane with the money landed before the plane with the
Yeah, I'm not gonna get into a
prisoners took
TikTok.
off.
What I do, though, want to disassociate the idea, that you haven't said, but has been in the public narrative, that there was some sort of tie between the two.
Yeah, I realize that you guys don't think there was, but it seems a very simple question to ask whether or not the plane with the money landed before the plane with the prisoners took off. I mean, I don't.
Yeah, I have no exact TikTok on that. What I do know is that the plane with the Americans was only delayed taking off because of logistics that were associated with the people on board.